So today I want to talk about spray painting, particularly about my camo pattern. I used to use this for years actually. That's why it's so much paint on it. This mold rack, what do you want to call it? From Let's Builder Kits, let's call it that way. I really like the shapes of it. There were some rounded lines and straight ones. It was a nice mix of things, of shapes. And I really like that because it makes it a little bit look like branches, but at the same time, yeah, not quite that. So it's kind of a unique look that I really liked. I've cleaned this one actually one time before to redefine all the sharp shapes that it had. But yeah, I was at that point like now also with the 3D print, and now I have that one. It's like, why do I not make 3D printable one? So when it's done its job, you can just throw it away, something like that. So I made one. They can 3D print. I would recommend that you may want to wipe the template off after every time, so you can keep the buildup of paint to a minimum. That way you can use it a little bit longer. Also, what it will help you with, especially when you do a lot of spray painting in one day, the layers can get quite high and then it doesn't really want to dry fast. And what will happen later is when you touch an object that you want to spray paint, you may start to rub the paint that's on the template on the object you are doing, and you will get really big globs of paint on it. So if you go really for a neat look, then it's not really nice. For me, it doesn't really matter so much, but this is something to keep in mind. Of course, also when you start reversing it, then you will rub the paint on your object. Also keep in mind, of course, your object itself needs to be kind of dry to the touch. So in that case, it does help when you have multiple objects. So it gives yourself time to let this object dry a bit. By the time you end with this one, you can start with this one again, instead of just working in one row with this one, because then the paint gets really wet, and that will also give a different effect. Even not about touching it, but if you are careful, just lay it on top of it and then do it, the paint will kind of blend more over, instead of having a high contrast shape going on. And sometimes that is nice, but I think if everything is like that, it becomes really boring to look at also, but also the camouflage effect is kind of fading away, because then it's just a gradation of colors and it doesn't really have that camouflaging effect that you are looking for. So yeah, for this to print, I don't think I need to explain much about it. I already give the description. I would not put any build adhesion supports on it. If you would put a skirt on it, you need to make this one smaller. And I would try to make this as big as possible on your print bed, unless you have a really big print bed, of course. Also, when you do a brim or something, you need to clean it all up. There's way too much work. It's better to have some parts kind of curling up, like I have here. For some reason it want to curl up, and at a different moment with the same bed leveling, it did not curl up, and another one did it at an other point in the middle. I would just say, because it's just a printing mold, just take it, just don't mind, be bothered by it, and just use it, and it saves you a lot of time. So do it like that, I would say. Besides that, of course, using plastic primer when you do it on 3D printed parts, and let's say metal primer when you use it on metal parts. There are two different types of primer. Then I would, if you want to go more from woodland, a color scheme and you have this type of colors, I would recommend starting out with the brown color, because the dark on the background color, let's say, make all the other colors look darker. And this can be in your favor because woodland is kind of a dark color scheme. We are going more for multicam. With this brand, I do not like to use the lightest color in the collection, let's say. Then I would start out with Coyote, but with a different brand that I used to use before. I would use the lighter one, and I did not even have this color because that brand, at least in the store, did not have that color. Then I would only have these colors basically. I would use the lighter one, and that would make all the colors way lighter. But with this brand, this green, this Vietnam green, is so bright, and you use it on a light background color, it's awful. In a way, yes, let's say plants that are alive and lively and leaves and things are really bright, but for my taste, it's punched out way too much. It's so bright. It looks like more that I'm starting to jump out the scene way more than I want. It draws too much attention to me for my taste. So I did not like it. It doesn't blend well with the other colors as well. So that's why. Maybe if you keep it like this, then yeah, okay. But then you miss kind of the green. It's just getting a bit too brownish, you could say. So there's a balance there, but it's also where you want to go. So that's recommended, especially when you don't know how the colors will work out with a new brand or something like that. Just try it out on something, and kind of play around with what color you use as the background color, because that's the one you will spray paint the entire object with, and that will have a great effect on how the other colors will look afterwards, because it's still a little bit transparent. So if it is a darker color underneath, it will be darker, maybe slightly brownish, or maybe more green when you're using green underneath. It will have an effect on it, and it will make a big difference in how it will blend all together as well. Also, what I've noticed, at least with the brand I've used, is when you use, let's say, a varnish to make, to protect kind of the hours you have put in to make a camouflage pattern, it will make the contrast harder, more punchy. So it will, you maybe want to use that varnish on your testing as well to kind of see like, oh, do I like this higher contrast? Because it does make the colors look a little bit different afterwards. I usually like it more after I varnish it with a matte varnish. I don't use glossy, of course, with camouflage. I think that would be a little bit silly. But of course, if you want, you can do that. But I think it defeats the purpose. But yeah, I will show some examples and also tell some experience with it, some recommendations. Because you have to keep in mind when you start to do camouflage, especially when you use a paintball marker and you are somebody that's of maybe airsoft as well. If you are putting a lot of stuff on your marker, on your replica marker every time, and you switch it out a lot, keep in mind when you're camouflaging your replica and you would choose to do it all camouflaged, it would look really, really strange when you put, let's say, a black flashlight on the side. But let's say you want to use this optic for just one time, or you're not really committed to spray paint this one. Then you have to keep in mind that it kind of starts to look really weird when it's just the only object on it that's not spray painted. Maybe you don't care about it that much and you say that's okay, but there's something to keep in mind, that everything you buy later on, you kind of need to try to match that one. And that also is a thing that you have to keep in mind. What happened to me was, I used to use a different brand, and let's say every year I was buying that brand, it was getting more and more expensive, that brand. To the point I was really like, this is getting ridiculous, because I need to use, in that case, 4 colors to do the camouflage itself. Then you have the primer, you got the varnish. It was getting so expensive that I was kind of like, it's not fun anymore. So keep that in mind as well. If you are really the person that's used a lot of different things and switch out a lot, and also maybe in the case, let's say, for selling it off, buying, then maybe some people don't like it. That is camouflage, of course, so that can hurt it as well. Just things to keep in mind. But if you are more going for, let's say, a two-tone design, like you got the black and tan, but then instead of the tan you do the tan parts camouflage, then you could also, then you may get away with, say, let's say, having black optics, flashlights, things like that. You also want to use something else that's not camouflaged. So kind of think that out ahead of time, that you maybe say like, okay, the rail will be black and everything that's going on the rail will be black and still will look white because there's still some black at the buffer tube, things like that, and it kind of brings it back in balance. There's something I want to keep in mind, because to tell you to keep in mind, because it can get really out of hand. It's just like everything, every time you buy new magazines, it kind of needs to be camouflaged as well, because otherwise it would look a little bit strange. And yeah, it can get really expensive fast, because if you start to go that route. But if you are kind of constrain yourself, like, okay, these are the magazines and I use this mark or replica like this with this red dots, things like that, and don't change it too much, then you probably will be fine. But just keep it in mind, there will be a price tag involved by starting out camouflaging things. Yeah, now now shall show you the different effects that you can have with, let's say, the same paint, with just doing the different background colors. Oh yeah, and one more thing, of course, when you do a camouflaging pattern, it's kind of recommended to stay within that same brand and note those color names if you don't keep the let's say the spray cans really well, because of course it will be always hard to kind of match the same color later on if you start changing the brand. So yeah, that's another thing to keep in mind, that you kind of are tied with that brand, with that platform, when you start to spray paint it in that color. And if you want to have your entire, let's say, collection of optics, flashlights, things like that, all matching, so you can put it on different things and it doesn't jump out like a different color scheme, then it's something to keep in mind, that you don't want to switch around with brands too much. Or if you do, try to do your best to blend it in as much as possible. Again, this is something that happened to this one. You can still see it, it's not the same. It's also different wear and tear, of course. The lower part you can see the black markings because the paint is already rubbing off. But this is done with my old color scheme, and let's say this part and the top, that is the new one. Let's say with a mix of the old one. I still had some of the old paint left, and then there was only, let's say, the brown and dark green, so I did not have the light colors. So I buy these colors and try to kind of mesh it up as close as possible, so it doesn't look too different. And yeah, it's still a bit different, but it doesn't bother me so much. So mission complete, if you could say. So I would recommend, when you do that, you spray paint it, keep in this case then the lower at the hand, the marker body, they can kind of look like, okay, is it getting a bit there? Oh, it needs a little bit more of, let's say, this or that to kind of get it there. And see how you do the patterning the same way a little bit. So you don't make it too green or too brown for this setup. So that's also, when you want to try to match it all up with different things, always keep an example with you. Then you can know it's like, okay, so this amount of brown it needs to be having still at the end, and so much of the light color. Otherwise, if you would apply more of this and let's say this one, it will get really green. Well, maybe some other is more, let's say, perfect blend of everything. And then other ones way more in the light, sandy spectrum of colors. So that's something to keep in mind. I hope this is clearly visible. But with this one, and we quite like this color. For this one I used the coyote color at first. I just made the entire thing this color. Then I started with, I believe, the brown color. Oh no, at first I started with the Vietnam green because I kind of liked the idea to later on spray paint some other colors with some fine dust over it, because I still find it quite a bright color. So when you put some different speckles of paint on it, it kind of starts, for your eye at least, kind of mix into a different color. So that's kind of what I was going for. There are maybe still some green parts left, but it's kind of blending over to some, yeah, let's say different tones. They are more muted, let's say, less clean and bright. This is something I usually do by pressing the cap really lightly, and then it will start to stutter more with some paint spatters, dots. And I kind of like that also to break the shapes up a little bit. That doesn't look so predictable. But yeah, it's up to you how artistic you want to be with it. But it can make the difference how you do it and how it starts to look. And then it becomes really a beautiful thing to see. But if you do it wrong, then it's functional, but it's not nice to look at. And I always try to make it that it's nice to look at, but also it's functional on the field. But this one is also an example where I needed to try to match this color, these two things, with the middle one, because this is an old with a different paint, and it's painted, let's say, a few years later, so I need to try to match it. So that's also something to keep in mind, that you need to do that. With camouflage, you cannot say like, okay, let's remove this one, so leave it all black or something like that. But this is a good example. This one is done with the brown as the first color, so this dark color. And it will definitely make the colors look different than when you do a light color. Because this is an example. This is the same colors, the same paint, but I used the lighter color first, so you can see how much lighter this one is compared to this one, because every tone of color will become a little bit lighter. That's also why I always found that this dark green would always be so dark when I was using the brown. And then later on, when I was using the lighter color first, it was way more blending in with the lighter green. And it was a nicer color to me. It was also a match more with multicam in this way. But this is an example that I find really, really ugly. This is when I had this new brand for the first time. For some reason I was really convinced that I could pull this off in one time, did not have to test it or something like that. So I was like with this one, using the lightest color at first, but it was turning out awful. But also this one have one color more, and there was also a different problem going on. Besides that, the colors are not blending well. The shapes are just bleh. It's just nothing. And that is also why I decided to make a new spray paint mold, because this one was getting just way too thick, so there were no sharp shapes anymore. So it was kind of getting boring to look at, even if the colors would not look so awful. And that's mainly because of the Vietnam green is so bright and the other colors look like mud and really earthy colors. And that one is so bright it looks like puke, you could say. It's not. So will it work? Yeah, it will work, but it's not nice to look at, so I have to redo them. And unfortunate thing was I did a lot of spray painting that day, so we have to redo it all. Like the suppressor ring, then I like it, but in this state, no, it looks awful. You can see maybe this thing, it's a little bit bad because you got the harder lines going on, but it's just the colors are just, it's really awful. So that's why I would recommend to do an example piece on let's say, maybe also on a, let's say, something cardboard box thing that's darker, that's already dark, and maybe something that's light, so you can see when you start to apply a light color on that, it will look different than on a lighter background than on a dark background. And the same of course when you use a dark color or maybe a dark green. And just see what kind of color balance you like. And also kind of get familiar with how you want the patterns. Also a benefit of this mold, at least this is with PLA plus, so it got a little bit of flex, you could say. Maybe normal PLA doesn't, it's a little bit more stiff, but maybe in this thickness it's also flexible. But when it's, let's say, dry to the touch, it makes it a little bit more possible to kind of bend it a little bit compared to, let's say, the injection mold rack that would be really stiff. But at the same time, it never really bothered me. If it would be, let's say, in a hard shape to get, you would put it just like this, and then you spray over it, and then use a different corner right here. Things like that, you know, you will work it out, and then work your way through it, and yeah. So I hope that it kind of the tips I give helps out, and it also helps you keep in mind where you get yourself into, because it can get really expensive fast. Because there's one thing to buy these spray cans one time and say like, okay, that's worth it, but maybe after the years you say like, oh damn, now I've already bought this and that, and I need to spray paint them also, otherwise it doesn't look right. Keep that in mind. There is a commitment in this involved, because you cannot really easily say like, okay, just remove it, you know, and let it go back to the original color. So yeah, hope that helps, and see you guys next time.